What if I told you that every single person you've ever met, every historical figure you've ever read about, and in fact, all 8 billion of us alive today, are descended from just a handful of survivors? A tiny, desperate group of ancestors who stared into the face of a global apocalypse and, against all odds, didn't blink. It sounds like the plot of a disaster movie, but the truth is, around 75,000 years ago, humanity was pushed so close to the edge of extinction that we almost disappeared from the planet forever. So what happened? What kind of catastrophe could nearly wipe out an entire species? And more importantly, when the world was ending, what did our ancestors do that allowed us, their distant descendants, to be here today? The story of our survival is one of the most incredible and terrifying chapters in the human saga. To understand the disaster, we first have to imagine the world back then. 75,000 years ago wasn't just a world of our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. Earth was actually a much more human place. Think about it. In Europe and West Asia, you had the Neanderthals, our famously robust and intelligent cousins. Over in Asia, the mysterious Denisovans roamed. And there were likely other hominin groups, ghosts in the fossil record we haven't even discovered yet. Our species, Homo sapiens, was just one of several human types on the block. We weren't special yet. We were mostly concentrated in Africa, just beginning to make tentative steps out into the wider world. We were survivors, yes, but we were far from the planet's dominant ape. And then the sky fell down. In what is now Sumatra, Indonesia, a mountain known as Toba didn't just erupt, it exploded. This wasn't a normal volcano. This was a supervolcano. The eruption of Mount Toba is the largest known explosive eruption in the last 25 million years. It's almost impossible for us to comprehend the scale. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens was terrifying, right? Toba was at least 5,000 times more powerful. It blasted over 2,800 cubic kilometers of rock, magma, and ash into the atmosphere. That's enough material to bury the entire state of Texas 5 feet deep. The immediate effects were apocalyptic. A pillar of ash and gas rocketed 50 kilometers into the stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows, incinerating clouds of gas and rock, moving at hundreds of miles per hour, sterilized thousands of square miles of the surrounding landscape. For anything living in that part of the world, it was instant annihilation. But the truly terrifying part wasn't the explosion itself. It was what happened next. That colossal plume of ash didn't just fall back to Earth. The finest particles, along with billions of tons of sulfur dioxide, spread around the globe, creating a thin, persistent veil in the upper atmosphere. This veil acted like a planetary sunshade, reflecting sunlight back into space. The result was a catastrophic, worldwide plunge in temperature. This is what scientists call a volcanic winter, and it was a winter like no other. It wasn't a season, it was an era. Global average temperatures may have dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius or 27 degrees Fahrenheit in higher latitudes. Think about that. A change of just 1 or 2 degrees today is enough to cause massive disruptions to our climate. This was an order of magnitude worse. The effect was almost immediate. The tropical rains failed, monsoons ceased. A sudden, brutal ice age was triggered, with glaciers expanding and sea levels dropping. For the plants that formed the base of every food chain, it was a death sentence. With the sun's light dimmed for years on end, photosynthesis slowed to a crawl or stopped altogether. Forests died, grasslands withered. The great herds of herbivores that our ancestors and their hominin cousins relied on for food starved to death. And as the animals died, so did the hunters. It was a complete, systematic collapse of the global ecosystem. A creepy, quiet, and frozen nightmare had descended upon the Earth. This bizarre, sunless world was our ancestors' new reality. The winter is thought to have lasted for at least 6 to 10 years, with its cooling effects lingering for 1,000 years more. This brings us to the Toba catastrophe theory. The theory proposes that this volcanic winter created a devastating population bottleneck for humanity. A bottleneck is exactly what it sounds like. A massive population gets squeezed through a tiny opening, and only a very small number make it through to the other side. As the world froze and starved, human populations plummeted. How small did we get? The genetic evidence is startling. By studying the DNA of people from all around the world today, geneticists can work backward, like detectives, to estimate the size of our ancestral population at different points in history. And what they found is a moment, right around 75,000 years ago, where human genetic diversity collapses. It's as if most of the genetic variation that had existed up to that point was simply erased. The data suggests that the total global population of Homo sapiens may have crashed to as few as 10,000 individuals. Some studies propose an even more dire number, perhaps only 1,000 breeding pairs, scattered across Africa and maybe a few pockets in Asia. Imagine that, the entire future of humanity resting on the shoulders of a group of people small enough to fit in a modern concert hall. One bad hunting season, one new disease, one wrong move, and we would have been gone, wiped from the earth like our Neanderthal and Denisovan cousins eventually were. It's an incredibly sobering thought. We were an endangered species. So, this is the great mystery. In the face of this planet-altering disaster, with food disappearing and an endless winter descending, how did we survive? What was our secret weapon? It wasn't that we were the strongest or the fastest. Neanderthals were physically more robust and better adapted to the cold. No, what saved us wasn't brawn. It was our brains, and something even more important, each other. The truth is, the survivors of Toba weren't just lucky, they were different. The intense pressure of this volcanic winter acted like a brutal evolutionary filter. It selected for certain traits, and the humans who possessed them were the ones who made it through. The key to our survival, it turns out, was a combination of two fundamentally human characteristics: cognitive flexibility and sophisticated social networks. Let's break that down. Cognitive flexibility is a fancy way of saying we could think outside the box. Our ancestors weren't locked into a single way of life. When their primary food source, like large game, disappeared, they didn't just starve, they innovated. They were able to figure out new, weird food sources and develop the new tools and strategies needed to acquire them. They could look at a seashell and see a food source. They could look at a certain type of rock and understand that, if heated in a fire in just the right way, it could be shaped into a much deadlier, more efficient spear point. This ability to adapt and problem solve on the fly was our superpower. While other hominins might have had a very effective but rigid toolkit for their specific environment, Homo sapiens had a mind that could invent a new toolkit when the environment itself declared war on them. But innovation alone isn't enough. A single brilliant inventor freezing to death in the volcanic winter is still a dead end. This is where the second, and perhaps most crucial piece of the puzzle comes in: our social structure. The surviving human groups were likely part of larger, interconnected social networks. Think of it less like a series of isolated families and more like a web. They didn't just cooperate within their own small band of 20 or 30 people. They maintained connections with other bands across a wide area. This social web was the ultimate survival insurance. If your group was starving, you could call on allies in a neighboring valley who might have found a new food source. It allowed for the exchange of vital information. Don't go east, the herds have vanished, but we found edible roots by the southern coast. It allowed for the exchange of people, ensuring genetic diversity and preventing inbreeding in a critically small population. And it allowed for the rapid spread of those new inventions. That new technique for heat-treating stone, it didn't just stay with one group, it was shared across the network, strengthening everyone. This level of long-distance cooperation and symbolic communication was, we think, uniquely human. And we actually have archaeological proof of this. In a series of caves at a place called Pinnacle Point, on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists have found a treasure trove of evidence. It's a snapshot of how a small group of humans survived the Toba-induced crisis. The caves overlook the ocean, and here, our ancestors did something brilliant. They turned to the sea. They learned to harvest shellfish, like mussels and limpets. This was an incredibly reliable food source, one that wasn't as affected by the chaos on land. The tides come in, the tides go out. It's predictable. But that's not all they found. They found evidence of incredibly advanced technology for the time. Tiny, carefully crafted stone blades, known as microliths, that were likely part of complex projectile weapons like spears or even arrows. And they found proof of that heat treatment process I mentioned, a complex, multi-stage technique that requires a deep understanding of materials and fire control. This wasn't primitive survival, this was advanced engineering born from desperation. And perhaps most tellingly, they found the earliest evidence for the use of ochre, a red pigment. They weren't eating it, they were using it as paint, they were making art, engaging in symbolic behavior. Why is this important? Because complex language and symbolic thought are the glue that holds large-scale social networks together. You can't maintain an alliance with a group 50 miles away without a shared understanding of symbols, rituals, and stories. The people at Pinnacle Point weren't just surviving, they were building the complex cultural and cognitive foundation that would eventually allow their descendants to repopulate the entire planet. They were becoming us. So when the long winter finally began to recede and the sun's warmth returned to the world, humanity was not the same. The population was tiny, but it was forged in fire and ice. The Toba catastrophe, as horrific as it was, may have acted as an evolutionary crucible. It filtered out those who couldn't adapt, and what emerged from the other side was a new kind of human, more innovative, more cooperative, and more reliant on culture and symbolism than ever before. This small group of survivors, armed with these powerful new cognitive and social tools, was primed for what came next. They didn't just reclaim their old world, they set out to conquer a new one. Fundamentally, the story of Toba is the story of our own improbable existence. We are all the children of apocalypse survivors. We carry the genetic legacy of a few thousand people who watched their world fall apart and responded not with despair, but with ingenuity and cooperation. They huddled together in coastal caves, figured out how to live from the sea, invented new technologies, and strengthened the social bonds that would see them through the darkest of times. Think about it. Every city, every piece of art, every scientific discovery we've ever made is possible only because that tiny band of ancestors refused to give up. Their resilience is our inheritance. It's a powerful and humbling reminder that when faced with the ultimate challenge, the greatest tool for our survival wasn't a sharper spear, but a helping hand. If you enjoyed this journey into our shared past, subscribe for more stories that connect us all.